Well, welcome to another lesson of the Discover Headless Tech course. I am Marcelo Lewin, the Headless Creator. As always, get a hold of me right there, Marcelo at headlesscreator.com. Today, my guest presenter is Colby Fayok. He's the Senior Developer Experience Engineer at Cloudinary, and he's going to show us how to optimize media from a headless source using Cloudinary. Now, you know how this works. Before we jump into the actual tutorial, let's get to know Colby a little bit. Colby, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here. I love your background. I love that whole purple, red. It's just great. I love it.
Thanks so much. And I love your background too. I'm a huge movie fan. So
I know you are. We're going to talk a little bit about that too in just a minute. But before we get started, tell us how you got into tech. What brought you there?
Sure. So it started in high school out of just general self-interest. I admittedly, it was MySpace profiles and Counter-Strike team pages where I just wanted to have something up on the web for my team or to make my profile look cool, right? So that's kind of where it started, and it took off from there. Through school, I did design, didn't make it into the program, and self-taught my way up through web development. But I'm here today as a developer experience engineer with an engineering background and loving to help teach people how to build things with the cool and awesome tools of the web.
Do you focus more on the front end or the back end? What's your favorite?
I'm definitely more focused on the front end. I can do it all, but I enjoy much more working on the front end.
Seeing that visual output.
Exactly.
Do you have a framework that you enjoy the most, or?
Right now, I'm really a big fan of Next.js. There's just a lot of cool stuff I can do with it. I like how the APIs feel, and I can just be super productive with it.
Now you have a lot of toys behind you, and also your photo, which people can go see at headlesscreator.com. You're like hugging all that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I used to work for a company called ThinkGeek, and this was probably
it's a very cool company. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad you heard of it. But
of course,
they used to sell geeky stuff. So Star Wars, for instance, and they used their employees for the product photos. So I was fortunate enough to become a model. It's the budding and start of my modeling career, where I became the hugger, and I would hug random plushes, including those fun Star Wars toys. And I thought it was a fun photo, and it was a little bit unique. So I started.
That photo is awesome. Profile. When I saw that photo, I'm like, I thought it was awesome, and I was a little envious because I need to do that too. I just loved it. And no, ThinkGeek, I remember back in the day, I used to do a lot of Comic Cons, and they were there all the time. Yeah. So definitely very cool. Very cool. And prior to starting, we also spoke a little bit about movies. You're a big movie fan. What's your favorite movie?
Right now, I'm huge into Marvel movies. I wouldn't say they're like my favorite movies of all time, but I've just been having such a blast watching the storyline progress. But one of the movies that stand out for me historically is Sunshine. If you've ever heard of that one.
Sounds familiar.
They have to go into space to reignite the sun because it's dying. So it's
oh my gosh,
it's a really cool space thriller. I definitely recommend it.
And speaking of Marvel, we just finished, I think it's called Moon Knight.
Oh, I still haven't watched that yet. How was it?
I loved it. I really liked it a lot. Yeah, I thought it was really good.
I really like that actor, so I'm excited to check it out.
The actor was amazing. He was truly amazing. But you know what? People didn't come here to listen to that. Or maybe they did. Who knows? Maybe I should change my entire format. You know, why not, right?
Yeah.
No, they came here to check out how to optimize media. So we can see your screen. I'm going to let you take over. If any of you watching live have any questions, please type them in the chat, and I'll go ahead and ask Colby. It's all yours.
Awesome. Sounds good. So I'm just going to kind of start off with this pretty basic e-commerce store, which I actually created for a course, but repurposing it for this to kind of walk through how this is going to work. And headless sites can really come in a number of different form factors, but I really like the example of e-commerce because of the different data layers and what you have to kind of think about when modeling that data. But what we're here to focus on is the media aspect of this, right? So if I open up my network tab and kind of refresh here and see what's going on, we can see that I'm loading a bunch of images. And this site is already optimized with Cloudinary. So we can see that all those requests are coming from Cloudinary. But what we're going to see is what happens when you're not using a Cloudinary optimized site and how it actually works when we're going to switch it over and what kind of benefits we're going to see. Now, to do this, we're going to use Graph CMS to start off. We're going to walk through a couple examples, but we're going to start off with Graph CMS, where here it's a headless CMS that's powered by GraphQL, where we can can easily have access to all of our data inside. Now, what I'm showing here is the different product photos. So for instance, if I go into this Cosmo trucker hat, which I used as an example, we can see that this loads up my product photo. Now, how do we add that? Well, we start off by creating our schema where we have our product, and we ultimately go into our content and we actually add that product where we store all the data. But we need to be able to create that image association, right? So if we go into our schema and look at the product schema, we can see that we have the image here, which is a Cloudinary asset. And that's how we're actually adding it to this file. Now, by default, this doesn't come out of the box with GraphCMS. You can just add a typical image, an asset picker that lets you select anything you want. But we want to be able to add our Cloudinary assets so that we can take advantage of that optimization. So how does that work when we're building our schema? Well, first we drag that over, but now once that's available, we can go over to our content inside of our products. And if I look at that Cosmo trucker hat, we can see that I have the ability to select that image right inside of my product. So if I click choose from Cloudinary, it's going to pop up my media library where I can go into my products and I can select any of those products I want, where I already have the trucker hat selected, so I don't need to make any changes here. But if I did select it and I add and close, I have that now available that I can save and publish. So let's see how we can add it somewhere else so that we can take advantage of media in other places if we already have that.
Colby, real quick question for you. On that plugin that allows you to go to Cloudinary, do you know if it respects any of the security permissions you have on Cloudinary for here? So will it only show me the assets that I have access to?
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. So I will get into that, but I can just get into that now.
If you're going to get into that, that's fine.
I wasn't going to touch specifically on security, but we can look at that part first. So the way that this works, the way that I can add this input into GraphCMS as a custom thing is their UI extensions feature, which anybody has access to, where they can build their own UI extension as a small app and they can add it in here in GraphCMS. Now let's just take a quick peek at my existing one, which is this Cloudinary asset, where if I edit it, we can see that it's currently pointing to this URL, which is going to, if I go to it, you're not going to see anything because it doesn't have the permissions. But if we scroll down, we start to see my information that I have set up for this asset picker, where I have my cloud name and I have my public API key so that I can communicate with Cloudinary. I can get all my assets and I can actually work with that. And I believe you also have to log in anyways before you have access to click through and edit it anyways. But either way, there is that security layer so that you are only focusing on that account in cloud that you have access to. But how do we, does that answer?
Yeah, no, that totally answers it. Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and anybody can add one of these extensions. If I go to the extension URL for a new one, I just have another one that I had as a demo. But what you do is you click run compatibility test. And at this point, GraphCMS checks to see if the extension is compatible. And then you can go through and configure it just like we saw with my asset picker that is already installed. So it's the same thing. You just need to make sure that you have a UI extension that's compatible with the GraphCMS functionality. But that said, let's see what it looks like when we're adding a new asset picker to a different schema. So if I head over to my schema and I go to category, we can see that we don't currently have an image on here. But what if on the category pages, so if I go to apparel, for instance, and let me make this bigger while we're working through, what if I wanted a big picture at the top that showed that this was the apparel page? So let's go back to GraphCMS and I can scroll down on this picker and I can drag over, or click rather, I can add my featured image. Then once I scroll down, I can simply click create or customize it as I need. And once it's created, take a second. Once it's created, I now have the ability to add that asset to any category I want. So let's see what that looks like. So if I head over to my content and I go to my category, we can see that for apparel, if I hit edit, I have all the products inside of apparel there, but also I have this featured image at the bottom. So if I now click choose from Cloudinary, I have access to my Cloudinary library where I can really choose any image that I want. So it's one of these images that you might see in my demo later, but how about we just select this sample image from now that comes with any Cloudinary account. And then I can click on the add and insert, where I now have this picture of flowers with a bee, which is going to be my apparel, even though it's not simply related, but just for this demo purposes. But now I can save and publish. And we'll see how in a second we can actually add it to the page, which is interesting as well. But let's first see how that data looks. Now, if I go over in the sidebar to my API playground, I can start to look at what this data looks like. Now, let's start off with the products, where that's the first thing we saw, right? We saw the products, and each and every one of them has an image. But if I go to products and I start to select things like my name, just so that we can start seeing that we have a list of all those products, but I want to see the image for each and every one of these. So I can just simply select my image, which is going to be my Cloudinary image. And just like that, we have our data structure that includes all that information about our Cloudinary asset, including a lot of the different things that we probably don't need for this example, but we have that full URL, we have the width, the height of the default image, how big it is. We have all the derived images from that, including all the transformations that you might apply on your own. But if we scroll down, we also have the public ID, and we have the secure URL, and really anything we need to be able to use this resource in our application. But we already have this implemented, right? So let's see how we can do this with the category. So I'm going to instead get out of the products, where I'm going to find and collapse this, my categories, where if I go and do the same thing, such as categories name, we can start to see the names. And then I'm going to additionally select the featured image here, where now we can see already that sample image that I selected. And if I actually open the secure URL, since we want to make sure we're using the secure version, and I open that up in a new tab, we see that sample image, which is exactly what we want for that apparel category. So how do we actually implement this inside of an application? So let me pull up my code, where in this particular instance, we're going to start by looking at the product page. So the way that I'm doing this for the product page is inside of my GraphQL query, and I'm going to get collapse down the sidebar since we don't need to see that and we can have a bigger display here. But we have our image right inside of that product query, where once we have that data, we're going to pass it right into our props in this Next.js application, where we can then have access to it inside of our React app. So if we scroll all the way to the top here, we see that we have this product prop. We scroll a little bit further down, we have this image tag where I'm specifying the width and height that I got from that Cloudinary asset. And then I'm additionally taking advantage of that public ID that I mentioned before. Now, you can certainly just drop in that secure URL into your application. But what I'm doing here is I'm taking the public ID and I'm passing it to this function that I created so that I can take advantage of more of the Cloudinary features when I'm composing the image URL. And I'll show you here what I mean by that. So if I actually look at this function, and I can see that I'm importing it from my library Cloudinary, which is right here, we can see that I have that build image function where I'm creating a new instance of an image from my source, which is going to be that public ID. I'm setting my quality to auto and my format to auto. And I'll show you what those mean in a second as well. But the way that it's working is I create this new CLD instance of my Cloudinary library, which is the Cloudinary URL gen library, where I pass in my cloud name, making sure that my URLs are secure, and I build that image accordingly. So let's see inside the browser, and I'll explain to you quick what that quality and format means. Or if I open this up in a new tab, we can see that I have that Q auto and the F auto, which stands for quality and format. And if we look inside the network tab real quick, we can see that when I refresh the page and look at this document, let me make this a little bit bigger here. I can click on this image. And if I scroll down, let me see, can I hide this as well? Hide the filters to give us a little more space. But if I scroll down, we can see that this is actually coming back as an AVIF. Now, I didn't upload it as an AVIF file. This is what Cloudinary is returning it. And that's because we're specifying that format of auto. Now, if I remove this format of auto and we refresh the page and I look down, we can see that it's going to be in that original format of JPEG. Now, what Cloudinary is going to do in the background when we specify that is it's going to try to determine what the best format it is that it can send. So that might be a JPEG, but more often than not, it's going to be an AVIF, specifically if you're in the Chrome browser, because not all browsers support AVIF, but others, like Safari, for instance, might support WebP, which still might give you the best results. But either way, based on what browser you're serving it to, and based on that particular instance of what's going to provide the best format, Cloudinary will deliver the best it can for that instance. Now, on top of that format, well, actually, let me just show you for a second. When we did that, so we now have the 59.8 kilobyte size, but let's go back to that format of auto, where we can see that size just dropped down to 29 kilobytes. So just by changing that format, we drop down the size of that. And let's see what it also looks like with WebP. I can change this format property to WebP, or really whatever format I want. And we can see that it's still smaller than that original image, but it's still not quite as small for AVIF as in our particular instance. But let's see what this looks like with the quality. So keep an eye, it's 29.1 kilobytes right now. But if we remove the queue of auto, you can see that this image must have already been optimized, but I'll show you in later examples as well. If you're serving unoptimized images, such as straight from Unsplash, or if you have non-technical people who are uploading images that aren't optimized, it's going to be really big, right? So what Cloudinary is also going to do automatically is it's going to try to determine how much it can compress that image without impacting anything that's human perceivable with the eyes. So that means you're not going to see any difference in the visual quality, but it's still going to get as small as it can.
Quick question for you. On the auto, is this something that is decided by Cloudinary automatically, or are you setting some parameters within Cloudinary in your account that says, for auto, these are the parameters that I want you to work with? And then I have another question for you, but I'll let you answer that one first.
Completely automatically. Cloudinary uses its algorithms when you pass in that auto parameter to determine what's going to be the best compression without sacrificing that visual
based quality on that delivery channel.
Yep.
I see. Okay, cool. And then it's not really a question, but it's more of a comment. I think this is an important thing to point out here about this transformation thing, to me, which is exciting, is about a single source of truth. Right, you have one image that you only have to update that image, and then you can have hundreds of varieties of that image without having to create those, and then imagine having to change it and then having to change all those versions, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, to me, what you just showed is really powerful, just from a single source of truth and content maintenance itself.
And this is all happening programmatically, right? And that's including the resizing of it. So if I take off all of these parameters, the F auto, the width and the height, we can see that once that loads, this is going to be our original file, which is 173 kilobytes.